In this video, we're going to take a look at all the necessary items that we need to know to put drawings on sheets. Some of the tools that we're going to use are importing a title block, creating a guide grid so that all of our views can be organized in the same location on a sheet. And we're also going to look at ways that we can optimize that process to make sure that we're continuously using the same standards from project to project. To put this view on a sheet, the first thing we need to do is create a new sheet. So I want to make sure I'm on the View tab. I'm going to click on Sheet. And the title block that I want is not listed here, so I'm going to go and click Load. And I'm going to go to my Imperial Library. Make sure I'm on Title Blocks. And I'm going to load in the E1 30 by 42. And hit OK. Now to put this view on a sheet, what I'll need to do is go into my project browser, find the view I'm looking for. In this case, it's going to be the floor plan, 1/8 inch. And I'll drag and drop it and place it on a sheet. Once I've got it set, I can go in and I can adjust the number. I'll call this one A201 because it's the first floor plan. And then I'll just give it a name. And if I repeat the process and do the same thing again, I could put the second floor plan on a sheet. And notice the number, it's going to follow in sequence. And I can just give it a name again. And put the view on the sheet. Now, you may have noticed that I did not put level 1 and level 2 in the same exact location on the sheet. They definitely do not align. So to do that, what I can do is I can put 1 in the location I want, and here I'm just using the directional pad on the keyboard to kind of fine-tune that location. And what I could do is I could pick a common grid intersection. So we'll say A and 1 is a good place for that. And I can create a guide grid. And I'll call this one Overall Plans because I might use a different one for something else. But this is the guide grid I want to use for my overall floor plans. Now, the big grid is nice to have, but it doesn't really give me a good spot to locate my plan. So I'm going to reduce this down all the way until I just have 1 intersection. Now, by doing that, what I can do is I can move the guide grid from that intersection to the intersection of grids A and 1. And now I have a common element between sheets that I could use to place my second floor plan on. So you may notice that the guide grid is not shown here. So what I need to do is go into my sheet properties, find guide grid, and turn on overall plans. Now I can move the view for level 2 from that same intersection to where the guide grid is sitting. And what that gives me is the plans in both views in the same location. For this lesson, we're going to take a look at different ways that we can add revisions to a sheet. But first, before we do that, we need to go ahead and create a revision schedule. The revision schedule is going to be part of our title block family. And there's a nice box here for it that we can use. So I'm going to select the family, hit Edit Family. And from here, we're going to create the revision schedule. From the View tab, I'll go to Revision Schedule. And it's going to ask me the different fields that I want. I'm looking for number, description, and date. So I'm going to take the sequence out, and we won't show that. I want to make sure this sorts properly, so I'm going to sort by number. And then on appearance, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I change the height from variable to user defined. And the other thing I like to do is just take off the title because I don't need it to say, revision schedule or anything like that. And I'll hit OK. Now I can go in and I can adjust the titles to match the way I want it to look. So number, description, and date. And now this is ready to be put on a sheet. So I'm going to close that. And I'm going to go into my schedules. I'll grab the one that I just created and drag it in. And the trick here is we want to just make sure we get it kind of within the wider lines of the title block. And I don't need this much space for the number because that's typically just, 1, 2, 3, 4, or A, B, C, D. But I do want a little bit more room for description, so I'll move that across. And then I'll use the rest to fill up for date so that we don't return to the next line with date. And this isn't an exact science, but we just want to get it as close as we can. And it's pretty important because this is going to show up on every single one of our sheets. So you can zoom in and use the directional pad to kind of locate this a little bit tighter if you want. And then the next step is we can go in, and if I select the revision schedule, you can see here that there's a control on the bottom. And as I drag that down, it'll allow me to add more lines to kind of fill in this box. Now I can go ahead and load this into my project. And I'm going to overwrite the existing version. And there's my revision schedule. Now to add a revision on a sheet, there's two different ways we can do this. I look at it as there's either a revision to the content on the sheet or that it's part of an issuance. So if it's part of an issuance, what we can do is we go to our View tab. There's a revision section here. And if there's already one there, we can use that. Like here we've got the plan check submittal. And I can add another one. And I can give it a date as well. And I'll just call it revision 1. And I can change my numbering from numeric to alphanumeric if I want. And we have two options. We can do per sheet or per project. We're going to stick with per sheet on this one. And I'll hit OK. And to apply those revisions, there's two things that we can do here. The first one is within the sheet properties. We have an option here for revision on sheet. If I click edit, we have the two different revisions that we've added. And so I can go ahead and where it says plan check submittal, I can just check to show revision on sheet. And now that becomes part of our revision schedule. If you look at our other sheet, notice it's not there. Now, if I wanted to add revision 1 to this sheet, I can go to my Annotate tab and I can add a revision cloud. Now, with the revision cloud, I have the option to use the revision that I want, either plan check submittal or revision 1. I'm going to stick with revision 1, and I'll just use the rectangle tool to draw a revision around the stair here and finish the sketch. Now, because I added this cloud to the sheet, it's going to show up in the revision block. To complete this, I'm going to want to tag that cloud. So I'll go to tag by category and I'll pick on the cloud. If there isn't a cloud loaded, like I have a case here, we'll go ahead and load one. And I'll load this from our Imperial library. And I'll just add this revision tag to the project. And then you can see here, because that revision is number A on the sheet, it's going to show up as an A here and here. This information can also be displayed in a sheet index. To create a sheet index, we go to View, Schedules, Sheet List, and then we pick the parameters just like any other schedule that we want to show here. We'll keep it pretty simple for this one. So we're going to go with sheet number, sheet name. We'll go with the current revision and current revision description. And we might as well add the date as well. Just like all our other schedules, we want to make sure the sorting is correct. Sorting by sheet number is pretty common, so we're going to go with that one. And I'll hit OK. You can see here that the current revisions are shown in our sheet list. To close this out, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and throw that on one of our sheets to see what it looks like. Just going to spread out some of these columns here so that we have them all on one row. And now we have a sheet list that also shows the current revision and date. A very common process within Revit is to export or print our sheets. In this video, we're going to take a look at both options, starting with printing. To print sheets in Revit, we go to File, Print. We'll select the printer that we want to use. In this case, I'm going to print to PDF. From there, we'll go to our settings and click Setup. And at this point, I want to pick the appropriate sheet size. And so we're using the E1 sheet. I want to make sure the zoom is set to 100% and the paper placement is set to center. By default, the reference and work planes will not be shown. Another option that's good to have turned off is to hide the unreferenced view tags. So if I have this checked, then what happens is if I have any extra views that were created, like these sections that you see here, those will not print. If I have that unchecked, then all of those view tags will show. So I'm going to check that. Go ahead and hit OK. You have the option when you make a few changes to the print setup to save it. For this case, I'll go ahead and say yes. And I'll call this one 30 by 42 PDF. And so anytime I go to print a 30 by 42 sheet, I can use that setting and I should be good to go. I'll hit preview to take a look at what my settings are going to do. This looks good. So I'll just hit close here. And I can go back in to print. And at this point, I can either print the current window, which is what we're seeing here, or I could change the option to selected views and sheets. Now, when I do that, what I need to do is I need to make sure that I'm either going to print each sheet as a separate file, or I'm going to have Revit combine the files into one single file. After that, I can hit select under selected views and sheets, and I can either print all of the views or just the sheets or both. So I'm going to go ahead and click uncheck views, and then I'll just check the two sheets that we've created in this lesson. Just like with the print setups, I have the option to save or save as for different view or sheet list settings. Since there's only two, I'm going to go ahead and just do it manually and hit OK. At this point, we're all ready to go. So we'll just hit OK and it'll print to your desired printer. Export settings are very similar as well. So if I go to the file, export, a common thing that we do a lot is export to DWG. And this is not just sheets, but it's also views. So if I export to DWG, I can export this current sheet to a DWG file using any export settings that I may have. And those settings can be customized so that each different category within Revit can be kicked out to a specific layer. By default, we want to use the AIA standard, but there are a ton of other ones that you can get. For this exercise, we're going to use the default one. And one of the things that we can do here is we can do the same thing where we can do all of the sheets within our set. We can do just the current one, Or we can even do all of the views in the model, and I can kick out CAD files of just about everything that we see here. For this exercise, we're just going to go ahead and do the sheets in the set and just this one. Once I've got it all set up, I can just click next. It'll ask me where to save it. You can pick the location, and then one thing you want to do is you want to pay attention to this next part here. Each view on the sheet can be set up as an external reference. So that means I've got this view and the schedule. Those are the two things. If I leave the settings the way they are right now, those will both come out as two different files. But if I want it all as one file, I'll need to make sure that I uncheck that box, and then I'll just get one file for this sheet. You can manually type in your file name or have it do it automatically, which is what we'll do here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and it'll export that CAD file for use later.
Worksharing allows multiple users to work on the same project simultaneously. The process involves creating a central model and local copies of the central model for each user. Users can then work in their local model and synchronize any changes to the central model, as well as reload changes from the central model to their local model. To begin, you need to enable worksharing. On the Collaborate ribbon, in the Manage Collaboration panel, click Collaborate. This opens the Collaborate dialog, and there are two options. Revit asks, how would you like to collaborate? You can select within your network or in BIM 360 Document Management. For this example, we'll select within your network and then click OK. Now Revit begins to enable work sharing, and it's also going to create two work sets. And if we look back in the Manage Collaboration panel, you can see there's an active work set dropdown, and when I expand that, you can see that there are two options: shared levels and grids and work set 1. Once work sharing has been enabled, you first need to create a central model. And really, at this point, you just need to save the project. And if you click Save in the Quick Access toolbar, Revit will save this model in the current location as a central model. Or we can click File and then Save, or Save As if we want to save it in a new location. For this example, I'll click Save, and then you can see Revit says File Save As Central. This is the first time that the project has been saved since work sharing is enabled. So therefore, the project is going to become a central model. I'm going to click No for right now, just to show the other option here. And if I click File, Save As, Project, and then we get the Save As dialog. And so if you're going to save it in another location, you can do that. And then you can click Options, and you can see in the work sharing area that make this a central model after save is selected, and it's grayed out, so you can't even change that. So once work sharing is enabled, Revit's going to make it a central model. So that's, once again, you really just need to save it. I'm just showing kind of the process of what's happening here. I'm going to click OK, and then we'll click Save. And now we have a central model. And now all the users who are going to be working on this project can create a local copy. Now, it's very critical that everyone creates a local copy and no one works in the central model. Because if somebody's working in the central model and they're making changes, and then people are trying to synchronize changes back to that central model, it can just become very confusing for Revit to be able to manage all those changes. And so that's why no one should ever work in the central model, or at least while If you're a BIM manager, there are things you need to do in the central model, but users should work in a local copy and synchronize changes. All right, I'm going to close this project for now, and then I'm going to click Open and find the central model. And now when I select the central model, you can see in the Open dialog in the work sharing area here at the bottom, there are two options. And Create New Local is selected by default. The other option is Detach from Central, and that's if you want to detach a project from the central file to create either another central file or just a detached version. So you don't want to select that if you're creating a local copy. Just make sure Create New Local is selected and then click Open. When you do, Revit is going to append your username to that file. So you can see here our exercise file, and then my username, which is my login ID for Autodesk, is appended to that file name. And if you want to control where those files are saved, you can click File, Options, and then in the File Location settings, there's a default path for user files, and that's where your local file is going to be saved. Okay, let's kind of continue on here with discussing some work sharing terminology and topics. So back on the Collaborate ribbon, we have work sets. And if you click Work Sets, it'll open the Work Sets dialog. And work sets are just a way to kind of break up the work. And there are many ways in which work sets can be used. So work sharing allows multiple people to work on the same project, and work sets is a way to divide that work up. And so when you create a model element, it's going to be assigned to a work set, so you can create as many or as few work sets as you want. And there are actually a couple ways in which work sets can be used. And let's take a look at that. For example, when I click New, I will call this work set Core and Shell, and I'm going to make it visible in all views. Then I'll click OK. And you can see that so far, everything that are all the work sets that are created say that they are editable, and I am the owner. And so one way to use work sets is to have specific people own work sets, which is what we have here. And what that means is that no other user can edit that work set. So it can be a little bit confusing. Editable is yes, but there's an owner, so that means the owner is the only one that can edit that work set. The other way to use work sets is to make them not editable, and people can just borrow them. In other words, there is not an owner of a work set. So if I select a work set, I can expand this drop down and select no, or I can simply click non-editable. Now in this case, I'm going to get a dialog stating that I have not synchronized with Central. So I need to do that. So I'll click close, and then let's click OK. And then Revit also asks if I want to make it the active work set, and I'll click yes. Now, the process of work sharing involves the users synchronizing with Central. So I'm going to click Synchronize and Modify Settings. And you can see right here, User Created Work Sets is available. So if I select this, I'm actually going to relinquish control of those work sets, and they're going to become non-editable. So I'm going to click OK. We'll synchronize with Central. And now when I open the work sets dialog, you can see that those three work sets are indeed not editable. Once again, I can click it and make it editable, or expand this drop down. It's another way to change that. Or you can simply synchronize and then relinquish them. Another way that work sharings are very that work sets are beneficial is to create a work set for each linked model. So for example, I'll click New, and if I select link dash or type link dash MEP, and then link dash structural, Now I have a work set that I can add an MEP linked model to, as well as a structural linked model to. And that will allow me to control whether or not those links are open. And you can set that up to where when you open the model, you can choose which work sets are open. And then also here in the work sets dialog, I can choose to close or open a work set. And so similar to core and shell, or if we had work sets for interiors or anything else, however you choose to divide that work up, you can then close work sets so that those model elements don't even open in the project, and it can really increase the performance of Revit. Okay, last thing, when I select a model element, you can see in the properties palette that there's a work set parameter, and I will change this to core and shell. And so each element is going to have a work set parameter, and when you create a model element, it's going to be added to the active work set, which you can see down here in the status bar. And then if you need to make an adjustment, you can always select a model element and then adjust the work set parameter here in the properties palette. And if you want to see the work sets, you can use a worksharing display mode. And if you select the work sets display mode, then the elements in the view will be color coded based on the work set. So you can see the two walls that I moved to core and shell are a different color than everything else. And so this is because we're working with an existing model and trying to make adjustments, but typically you want to do this right from the beginning. That way all of the elements are on the correct work set.
In this video, we're going to link Revit models from other disciplines, assign them to the work sets we've already created, and use the copy monitor tool to copy elements from other models into our model. The first thing that we want to do here is we're going to go to Insert and Link Revit. From here, I can select the model I want to link, structural model in this case, and I want to make sure the positioning is set to auto origin to origin. I'll go ahead and click Open, and it's going to let me know that the structural model has a copy of the architectural model, which is a good thing because they built it based on the architectural model. And I'll just say close because it's not going to be visible because it was an overlay in their model, and that's fine. The next thing I'll do is I will select that structural model, and I can change that work set from work set 1 to the link structural that I set. Now that that is set to the structural model, you can see that the other elements, like my walls, are set to work set 1, whereas the structural model is now set to link structural. And what I can do is I can check that visibility by looking at the work set display. When I click on the work set display, I can turn it on or off. And what I like to do is I'll just check it based on work sets, and it'll show me different colors for the elements that are on the different work sets. I can also set the settings to display only specific elements in color. So if I only wanted to see, say, what the structural model was on, to make sure I didn't have anything else on that work set, I could do that, and I can see, okay, well, here's the footings. Obviously, maybe a slab or a floor deck here are shown only in the structural model. One of the other things that I can do with a Revit link is I can copy and monitor certain elements. So in this case, since we didn't have the grids shown on the architectural model, we can go in and we can actually copy and monitor those elements into ours. It's called copy monitor because it's going to copy the elements from that structural model into the architectural model, and it's also going to monitor them every time we reload that link. So if there's something that changes, I'll get a notification saying that grid 7 has moved from its previous location. So to do that, I'll go to Copy Monitor, and I'll go ahead and say Select the link, and I'll select the structural link. And what we want to do is we want to copy elements. So I'll go ahead and select Copy, And then I can pick the grids that I want to copy into my project. Once I've done selecting all the ones that I want to pick, I can hit finish. And now you can see grid A versus grid C are now different. So C is part of the structural model still, whereas grid A, 1, 2, and 3 are all part of the architectural model, whereas before they were just standard links. Another thing I can do with my Revit links is I can run an interference check. An interference check is going to check to see if there's any clashes between either my model, the architectural model, or a linked model, or between two linked models. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and insert another link. And I'm going to link in the MEP model using the same auto to origin setting. Now I'm going to go to our Collaborate tab, and I'm going to find Interference Check here at the end. When I hit Run Interference Check, it's going to give me the option to run a check between my current project against one of these other two, or I can run, say, Structural from my current project, or MEP from my current project. And what I like to do is I'll run MEP against a specific category that I have in my model. So I would pick maybe walls and floors just to see which one of these elements will go with pipes and ducts, because those are normally the larger elements. And I can go ahead and hit OK. And it'll go ahead and run a clash detection, and it'll give me a report that shows me where each one of these things goes through. And just like some of our other errors, what I could do is I could actually select it, and I can have it show me where that clash occurs. And it'll try to find a good location to show that. And I can also use the element IDs to check that as well. This report can also be exported to an HTML format, so I can use it to cross-reference at a later date when I don't have this open anymore. Switching the group by to a different category, I can see it a little bit differently, where it's going to show me pipes clashing with floors and each one of the instances. So instead of category 1, which was floors to ducts, floors to pipes, I can switch it to pipes to floors, ducts to floors, that kind of thing. In this video, we're going to take a look at how the survey point and the project base point can be used to establish the model's real-world position. We're also going to take a look at how we can publish that position and those coordinates to models that we have linked into our project. The first thing we need to do is we need to link in a CAD file, typically something of a survey or from a civil engineer, that we can use to establish those points. So we'll go to Insert, Link CAD. I'll pick the site topo file. And what I want to do is I'm going to leave this as auto center to center, and I'll leave the colors as preserved. Click Open. And now I have a model linked in to my site plan here. From here, I'm going to go to the Manage tab, and under Coordinates, I have a few options. We can acquire, publish, or we can specify the specific points, or we can even check the coordinates of elements with linked CAD files. In this case, we want to acquire the coordinates from the CAD file. What this is going to do is going to acquire that 0, point for our survey point for this model, and it'll allow me to align the two with the global coordinates. So I'll select the CAD link. You can see that the survey point goes to the corner of the site, and the project base point stays in the same location. What I need to do now is I need to set my orientation or angle to true north to match, but I want to make sure my orientation is set to true north for the site plan view. And in this case, that angle to true north is going to be 35 degrees. You can see they align. Now, these two don't align perfectly at this point because of the way that I imported in the CAD file. So right now, what I need to do is just go ahead and move my survey point so that it matches my Revit model. And then I can go ahead and, using the unclip option for my project base point, I can move it to something that makes a little bit more sense. So during, with the project, it'd be difficult for me to say the project base point is at the center of the middle of the building kind of thing. It doesn't really work out, but if I pick a corner that might be a grid intersection, that's a lot easier to communicate. So I want to unclip this so that I can essentially break the relationship between the survey point and the project base point. And I'll go ahead and move the project base point from its arbitrary location to the corner of the building here. After I've made that move, I'll go ahead and reclip it. Now I can go ahead and I can link a model if I didn't have one already, but we'll go ahead and do it again. Insert, Revit link. I'll just grab this structural model. And now that I have the structural model imported, what I could do is I can go through the same process, but instead of acquire coordinates, I could use publish coordinates. And that'll publish the coordinates that we have set in our architectural model to the structural model. That way we're now all using the same coordinate system and the building is located on the planet instead of just being at an arbitrary location. In this video, we're going to take a look at phasing, specifically what it takes to create a demolition floor plan, how the graphics are controlled, and the appropriate phase and phase filter settings we need to show the elements that we're looking to show. The first thing that we want to do is set up the different views that we have. I've already got an existing level 1 set up here. So what I'll do is I'll right click, duplicate view, and since there aren't any annotation elements that I want to bring over, I'll just use duplicate. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to be demo level 1 instead of existing level 1. Now I'm going to set the phase and the phase filter to show the way I need it to show for a demo plan. In the view properties, I'll change the phase filter from show all to be previous plus demo. What that's going to do is going to show the elements on the previous phase plus the elements that are being demolished on the current phase. The phase needs to be switched to new construction so that it'll show the existing to remain elements and the existing to be demolished elements. From here, what we can do is we can identify the elements that we want to be demolished. For this project, we want to remove all the walls and doors that surround this area between grid lines A and B and 2 and 5. The stairwells and the core are going to be existing to remain. To demolish an element, we can go in and we can simply select it and we can change the phase demolished from none to new construction. You can see when I do that, it's going to change that element, the wall in this case, from being a gray solid line to a black dashed line. Now this gets a little trickier when we're dealing with walls that we want a portion to remain and a portion to be removed. In order to make that happen, we need to use the split tool. I'll use the split element tool to divide the walls into 2 pieces so that I can demolish the rest of the walls that are set to be demolished. Another way to demo items is from the Modify tab. We can use the sledgehammer, the Demolish tool, and I can go through and I can demolish the elements I want. Now you'll notice when I demolish this wall, all the elements that are hosted within it will be set to demolished as well. Now that I have the elements set to be demolished, let's take a look at the phase settings and what creates these graphic overrides. If we go to our Manage tab, Phases, you can see we have our project phases. We're using the default existing and new construction. We have our phase filters, which you can see here if we go to the one we use, previous plus demo. New is not being displayed. Existing and demolished are being overridden. Those are overridden based on these graphic overrides. So if I wanted to make changes here, I could easily do that. So if existing is being overridden, I could do something that will globally change across the project, like change my cut pattern. Instead of it being hidden, I could change the pattern to be a solid light gray color. And if I wanted the demo items that are being cut to show more clearly, I could use a heavier line weight. Now those overrides are being implemented because these two settings here for existing and demolish are set to be overridden based on this phase filter. When I hit OK, you can see that now the existing to remain elements are shown with a gray poche, and the existing to be demolished elements are shown with bold lines. With design options, a team can develop, evaluate, and redesign a building or its components with a single project file. In this case, we can do a couple different options for a new interior layout for this office building. We've already got one laid out. What we're going to do is we're going to enable design options and set the new walls to a new option, and then we'll create a new design option for a second layout. To get design options started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select the design options button down on the bottom. And initially, all we have is essentially the main model, which would be the elements that are already existing in there. As a best practice, you want to have just those elements ready to go and then draw your new elements on the option sets. And that'll make sense as we go through this. So the first thing I'll do is create my first option set. By doing that, it's going to create the option set and my first option. I'm going to go ahead and say Edit Selected and close this dialog box. What that's going to do is going to gray out everything that you see here. If you notice, if I try to select, I can't grab any of those elements. To add these options, to add these walls to the design option, what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck where it says Active Only, and that'll allow me to select these elements. I'm going to go ahead and select all the walls and doors that are part of our first design option. And I'm going to use the Add to Set button to add those to option 1. To finish editing, I'm going to go to Design Options button again and click Finish Editing. Now I'm back into the main model editing mode, and you'll notice that I am not able to select the walls or doors from option 1. If I want to create a new design option, I'll go back into the Design Options dialog box. Within the option set, I can add a new option. When I click on option 2 and say Edit Selected, notice that all the elements from option 1 disappear. At this point, I can draw a different layout. And all the elements that I draw at this point will be part of the new option set. Now that I'm done editing option 2, I can go back into the design options dialog box and I can say finish editing. By default, this view is set to show the primary option, which when we look at the design options box, you can see here that option 1 is set to primary. If I wanted to, I can make option 2 primary, and then it'll go ahead and swap it back to option 2. Now, if I need to create floor plans for each of these different views, what I can do is I can duplicate level 1, which is what we're working in now, and I can rename these to match the different options. So this will be new level 1, option 2, and I'll rename the other one to reflect option 1. Now it's just a matter of changing the properties in my visibility and graphic overrides to display the option that I'm looking for. This is the new level 1 option 2 view. So I'll go in, visibility and graphic overrides, and I'll change the design option from automatic, which will show the primary, to option 2. And I can do the same thing with option 1. And I like to change it to option 1, even though it's automatically going to show the primary, just in case if we go down the line and we change the primary from option 1 to option 2, then I'll always know that this view is set to option 1. For this lesson, we're going to take a look at some tools that we can use to manage our models. We're going to start with purging all the unused elements, and then we're going to follow up with checking some of the warnings that exist in the model and look at some techniques we can use to resolve those warnings. The first thing we want to do is go to our Manage tab. Within the Manage tab, we'll find Purge Unused. Now, this model is not very heavy and doesn't have a ton of elements, but don't be surprised if you purge a model that's been worked on for quite a while and there are thousands of elements that are not being used. When you purge a model, you want to make sure that you have a good idea of what's going to be removed. And you also want to consider the timing of doing this. After you start a project with a well-developed template, it's probably not a good idea to purge at that point because you haven't gotten to the point where you've used the elements that you're going to use for that project. Towards the end of a project, or maybe right before your first submittal, if you were to purge everything, it's probably not that bad of an idea. But if you want to selectively purge, what you can do is you can come in and you can start immediately by saying check none. And then you can go in and you can say, well, I'm not going to be using any of these precast door types, so I can go ahead and I can remove those. Now within those families, there may be types that you want to use. In this case, we don't have any of those, but we could just selectively purge out, 1 or 2 of them. So I'll go ahead and select these doors. And at this point, as you see me expanding these things, you'll notice that these elements are only ones being purged. If I wanted to purge an image from the model, you can see it's in raster image. I can check that as well. Now the number of items checked is down to 14, and I can hit OK. And now I've just removed those 14 elements from my model. This is good practice because it's just better and more efficient to run on a model that doesn't have extra things that you aren't going to be using. Another way to make your model more efficient is to make sure and limit the amount of warnings and errors that you have. Same thing, from the Manage tab, we'll go to Warnings, and a dialog box will pop up in the bottom right. We can look at all of these warnings individually, and we can resolve those issues as we go through. So if I try to resolve warning 17 here, what I can do is I can find the element, and I know that it's going to exist somewhere on this edge here. So I'm going to close my hidden windows, and I'll go to my 3D view. And the reason I'm getting the error is because there's a tiny segment of a curtain wall here that really shouldn't be there. And so I can delete that, and then I've resolved that error. Another thing you can do with the warnings, and this is really not too bad here, you can also export them into an HTML file that you could use to reference if you're trying to remove them, because sometimes it's hard to go through and see them within here. And what's great is each one of them is going to give you the element ID, which is helpful because if you have those numbers, you can search element ID and it'll actually find that element ID for you, which in this case was that room, and I could reference that report that I kicked out to go ahead and resolve those errors. In this video, we're going to take a look at a couple of ways that you can optimize your model performance. The first option we're going to look at is auditing a model. And you want to use the audit function periodically to maintain the health of your Revit model when you're preparing to upgrade the software, or as needed to locate and correct any issues. The audit function is going to scan, detect, and fix any corrupt elements in the model. And the one thing that's a little unfortunate is it does not provide feedback on which elements were fixed. This can take quite a while depending on the size of the model, so you want to make sure you have your time planned out accordingly. And as a best practice, it's probably not a bad idea to do this maybe on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And if there's a lot of changes, or if you've kind of just deleted or done a wholesale change to the model, you might want to do this a little bit more often. You can also do this with families and your template files to make sure you're not spreading out a lot of different corruptions throughout. To audit, this is a process that takes place when you open a model. So I'm going to go from our recent files window to open, and I'm going to open one of my files here, and it's an option when you go to open down on the bottom left of the screen. So just like I mentioned, when you go to click that, it's going to let you know that this might take a little while. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, that's okay. Let's go ahead and do it. And when I click open, it's going to go ahead and run through that auditing process. Now, it's very important after you do the audit that you go ahead and save the model. Because if you don't do that, then everything that you just went through, this audit process wasn't too long, but you're just going to have to do it again anyway. The other thing that we can do, which is a big help to models, especially if you're in a work sharing environment, is compact the central model. So what I'll do as a regular workflow is I'll periodically synchronize with the compact central model option selected. And what this will do is it'll reduce the file size for workset enabled files. And what's happening is it's going to compact all of the information within the central model, because it's going to rewrite the entire file and save it back to your server. If you don't do this, you're just going to end up with a lot of gaps within the file, and it's going to be a larger file than usual. This does take a little bit longer, so just like audit, you want to make sure you have your time planned accordingly. It's a pretty straightforward process. We'll just go to synchronize, and we'll just check the compact central model option, hit OK, and it'll go through the process of compacting the model as it synchronizes back to the central. A tool that I find myself using quite a bit, especially when starting new projects, is transfer project standards. Project standards are going to include the following: family types. This includes system families, but not necessarily all of the loaded families. Your global parameters, line weights, materials, view templates, and object styles. Annotation styles, color fill schemes, fill patterns, and also some of your print settings as well. So if you're finding yourself having to redo things that you know that you've done in the past, you could open up one of those models that has that information, and you can transfer those into your new one. So here I have two models open, Model A and Model B. And what I want to do is I want to transfer into Model A from Model B. So I'll go to Manage, Transfer Project Standards. And you can see here it says Copy From. And I just pick the model that I want to copy from. Now, I don't do this as a complete wholesale transfer from one to the other. But what I will do is I'll hit Check None. And I'll be very specific about what I want to bring in. So if I know I had arrowhead styles that I liked in that other model, I'll want to bring that in. Something like ceiling types is a good one. If you had a specific change in like your callout tags and your elevations and things like that, that you want to make sure are carried over into this new project, then that would be something you'd want to select. For this exercise, I'm going to grab the ceiling types. I'm going to grab the line patterns, styles, and weights, object styles, and view templates. And what this will do is it'll allow me to bring those elements in from the other model into this one. A lot of times those things are going to exist in both. And so what I'll do to avoid completely overriding stuff, unless I know that's absolutely what I need to do, I'm going to go with the new only option. And now I've just transferred from one model to the other a specific set of elements that I can use into the new model. To customize the project browser to support the way that we work, you can either group, sort, and filter the list of views, sheets, and schedules to meet your needs. To do that, where it says Views here, I'm going to right-click, go to Browser Organization, and I can change it from Scale to Discipline or Not On Sheets or any of these options that you see here. And I can even customize them a little bit. So let's say I wanted to sort by discipline, but I also wanted to make sure that scale was part of that equation. So where it says Discipline, with Discipline checked, I can click Edit. And now I can see that my filtering is not being done here, which is fine. But grouping and sorting is being grouped by discipline, then by family and type. And then what I could do is I could say, okay, well, I would like to group also by view scale. And what that'll do is it'll maintain this level of organization that we see here. But it'll also add another level, which is going to be discipline and family and type. So we'll go ahead and hit OK, and OK again. And now you can see that our views are broken out by the view type and also the view scale. We can do the same thing with a project that has sheets included. And one way that we could do that is we can sort with a custom parameter. So from the Manage tab, if we went to Project Parameters, what I could do is I could add a parameter to the project that was specific to, say, sheets. And it could be something as simple as, package. And what this will allow me to do is if I define the different packages for the sheets, I could have one that's like a city submittal package or design package or any of those options. And then I can sort my sheet list to be that way as well. So if I were to add a few sheets here quickly, what I could do is I could do browser organization specific to sheets. And I can add a new option And I could say filter by and say package equal to, and if I had a parameter, I could give it to that. Or I could simply just say sort by package and then show the whole thing. But we always want to make sure we're still sorting by sheet number. So if I were to go in and say, look at the properties of sheet A11 here, you can see that I have package. And so just to be, for this example, I'll call it package A. And then when we look at our browser organization, when we use that as our sorting method, it'll put that sheet within package A, and all the other ones are with the question marks because those have not been defined yet. And that's how we can sort our views and our sheets within the project browser.